Yep, I'm beginning recording and we can begin.
Great. Okay. So tonight we've got Ryan Hansen. Is that how you say it?
That's right, Ryan Hansen.
Thanks. Ryan is going to be our moderator tonight. He's going to give a break to Jean, and so we are very appreciative to have you here, Ryan. I'm going to call to order the planning board meeting for the city of Boulder for Thursday, February 4th, 2021. It's 6:02 in the evening, and we have a quorum of 5 tonight, with Sarah Silver and Lupita Montoya absent. Going to turn it over right now to Ryan to provide us with the process for tonight's hearing, and take it away, Ryan.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. My name is Ryan Hansen. I work for the people of Boulder, Colorado as an engagement specialist in our communication and engagement department. And let me go ahead and pull up some guidelines for this evening. Okay. One thing to note, that as we move forward with online engagement and hosting planning meetings and other sessions virtually, we are working to strike a balance between transparent engagement and online security, recognizing that now anyone anywhere across the world is able to join the session tonight. So we are very glad that each of you have joined us this evening, and want to call that, any activities that are disrupting or delaying, interfering with this meeting are prohibited. And the time for speaking or asking questions may be limited during that public hearing time. And we ask that no one speaks longer than the time allotted. And want to make sure that folks are joining Zoom the session with your real name. If folks can hear this watching and don't have your full real name in there, please go ahead and revise that now. And moving on to this next one here. So video, sharing video will be allowed for city staff, for planning board members, for applicants. Anyone who wishes to share in the public hearing will be participating by voice only. And the person presiding at this meeting, our chair here tonight, will support enforcement for these rules, and will mute anyone who is not violating those rules. The chat function is enabled tonight. Please feel free to send any technical or process questions to the chat. We will make sure to address those. There is the raise the hand feature as well for folks who wish to speak during the public hearings. And then, we'll have staff and applicants only sharing their screen during this meeting. So appreciate your patience and flexibility and grace with these guidelines as we move to virtual format. And again, any questions, please go ahead and drop those into chat. And Carmen, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. All right, Lisa, if you can edit your name and just put a P. No, you just did it. Great, congratulations. All right, so the first order tonight is public participation. And this is for members of the public who might want to address the planning board about items that are not on our public hearing agenda tonight. So as a reminder, we're looking at a zoning matter for 3303 and 3305 Broadway. And we're looking at a concept plan review tonight for the Boulder Best Western Motel at 770 28th. So if you want to address either the rezoning of 3303, 3305 Broadway or the Best Western, you need to wait until after the presentations for those matters, and you can address the planning board after the matter you want to address. If you have a general matter that you want to address the board about, this is your time. Each member of the public who wants to will have 3 minutes, and I'm going to let Ryan manage this process. So Ryan, I'm going to flip it back over to you.
Right, thank you so much. We do have a number of folks who have identified that they would like to speak during this time. And let's see, I believe we have Mark Meyer, we have Lynn Siegel, and we have RP BAM BH. I please encourage you to change your name so you can have your full real name present there to participate. And I believe Mark was first. We'll have 3 minutes for each speaker. I'll go ahead and set a timer. I'll give folks a 30-second heads up when your time is approaching 30 seconds, and then you'll hear the timer go off at the 3-minute mark. All right. So first up, we do have Mark Meyer, and we'll go ahead and open up your mic, Mark.
Great. Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and your 3 minutes begin.
Thank you. My name is Mark Meyer. I live at 1177 Cascade. I'm speaking on behalf tonight of several of our neighbors, and we want to emphasize that it's extremely important that the planning board have input from the neighbors on the conditions being considered related to Marpa House at 891 12th Street, as the neighbors are the ones who will be most impacted. We appreciate last week or 2 weeks ago your consideration, and thank you for hearing our concerns at your last meeting. If you really believe that neighborhood input is valuable, then you should want to have feedback from us and comment on the conditions that are being proposed and that you will consider. This is not, I'm not making a substantive comment. I'm really just talking about process and procedure. This does not have to be a huge time sink for you, but rather you could reopen your hearing to allow the comments, hopefully verbally, but also written comments, only on the conditions and nothing else. At least written comments at a minimum. The neighborhood is quite familiar with all the issues that were previously litigated. We see the nuances and the loopholes that you may not be aware of or you may miss. These are things that we live with every day. So we want to thank you for your consideration. We hope you'll consider taking public input from the neighbors on the conditions. The goal is to provide a constructive set of comments to ensure a good, long-lasting solution for what you're going to consider and what is proposed. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your good consideration.
Thank you, Mark. We'll go ahead and move to our next participant who has a hand raised to speak at the public hearing, Lynn Siegel. We'll go ahead and allow to open up your mic here. Lynn, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I did. If my audio wavers,
Lynn, we can hear you, and your 3 minutes begin.
Whatsoever, Ryan, I want to know immediately. Thank you. I want my video window. I've been talking about this since March. No, you're not responsible, but you work, Ryan, for people that have the control for that. This is about public engagement, and it's not okay if I can see you, but you can't see me. Not only that, I want to know who's at this meeting. I don't have a clue. I've got two things here, chat and a lower hand. Now the city council has a participants list. Everyone's on there. It's listed. It's a click away. When I go to a meeting, I like to know who's at the meeting. There's a virus now. I can't know anything. I'm stuck in my house all the time. Well, I like to know who I'm interacting with. This is so not okay. Now, regards Marpa House. John Kirkwood connived with the neighbors, bought them wine, had dinner with them, acted like he was negotiating a deal with them as a real estate person, coordinated with John Cobb in Halifax, turned around and outbid the neighborhood group who was offering to help fund their purchase of that property. Marpa House is the model community house for Boulder. You will never have another one like Marpa House. This should never have been allowed to happen, and you condoned it. I am ashamed of my planning board. There is no excuse for this. My God, they had public investigators. This is stunning what happened here. This, you know, Sarah Silver was bringing up, she wanted a children's playground in there. Does Sarah Silver, or do any of you understand that each of those 48 units are 1 bedroom in 16 3-bedroom units? That means each person pays first, last month, and damage deposit. Do you think a family is going to join into a place like that and rent 3 separate bedrooms with 3 separate damage deposits and first and last month rent? You know what this business model is. It's all about extortion from university students. It's the Ring of Fire, like I said. The Ring of Fire is a volcanic lane of mountains. He's got 3 other mountains up on the hill, and he's raking it in on all the, and now he's going for this place. That was your one model of successful 40 years worth of community housing in Boulder. 1 big kitchen that was just remodeled, by the way. Shame on you.
All right.
So before we continue on with public comment, we chose to continue the Marpa House hearing. We had closed public comment on Marpa House, and this is, you know, I was inclined to just let the first speaker speak, but to the extent that there are going to be a lot of people using general public comment as a second bite at the public comment apple for Marpa House, I don't think that that's the direction that we want to go. I'll ask Hella if she agrees with that before we make a call on this. So if Hella, our city attorney's rep, can put on her video and come and say hi to us about this, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, Hella, for checking in.
Hi, Harman. Yeah, I think the message you sent at the last hearing is that the public hearing was closed and that you couldn't consider any additional testimony outside of the public hearing. So the testimony that's being given would fall under that. I think in general public comment, you can speak generally about anything you want to speak, but it's really not something the planning board can consider at this point in time unless you open the public hearing again for that particular meeting.
Okay, so if your intention was to come up and provide additional public comment on the Marpa House matter that we heard at our last planning board hearing, I'm going to have to ask you to hold that comment and not present it to us tonight. Ryan, you can pick up where you left off.
All right, thank you. The next speaker we have is Daniel Harberg. So Daniel, will go ahead and turn on your mic here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hear you, and your 3 minutes begin.
Thanks. Well, Harman, you kind of preempted my comments. So thanks for calling things out and making it explicitly clear what can and cannot be said. I guess I would just say, you know, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here and to be in all of these meetings. I know that the last, meeting that you guys had ran a long time. Perhaps long enough even to grow that mustache back, Harman. I know that wasn't the first time. So I, not wanting to get into any of the specifics of your previous comments, I would just say, I think it's really important for the community to feel like they can participate in what happens on a city level, especially with things in their localized neighborhoods. I know there are a lot of feelings and there's a lot of work and effort that the community puts into specific projects, not to name anyone by name, but I think when the process goes by in a way that people feel shut out of kind of the continued conversation, I know it's really demoralizing for people. So I don't want to comment specifically on how you guys guide your decision-making process around any specific property, but I just would like to make it clear that I know a lot of the community feels very passionate about these things, and I think with the procedure, it would really be wonderful to be able to make sure that their voices feel heard with subsequent steps. So I hope that wasn't kind of infringing upon the what I am and am not allowed to say about specific projects, but from a high-level procedural perspective, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hear the perspective of everyone involved, the community among others. So thanks very much, and thanks again for fighting the good fight and being here, after working hours.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that.
All right, thank you, Danielle. And next up is Susan Peterson. Susan, we'll go ahead and turn on your mic. You'll just want to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Susan Peterson. This will be really brief. I'm a Boulder resident and a member of the Environmental Advisory Board, and we've just been talking a lot lately on EAB about the intersection between the environment and planning and transportation and water resources and open space and mountain parks. So we decided last night that each person on EAB would take the responsibility of just sitting in and participating in one other board, and you poor folks are stuck with me. So I'm just kind of introducing myself and letting you know that I'm going to try to attend some of the planning board meetings, and if there are environmental considerations that I think should be brought to the fore, I will be doing that. So thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Nice to meet you.
You as well.
All right, thank you, Susan. Recognizing that Tila Duheim also will be speaking tonight. Go ahead and Tila, turn on your mic.
There we go. How's that?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Hi, this is Tila Duheim. I am the current chair of the Transportation Advisory Board. So you have a bunch of board members peeking in this evening. I am mostly here because of a development recently with City Council after TAB haranguing Council and the City Manager's Office for years about being more involved earlier on in the review of different developments. It appears that TAB is likely to become involved at concept review as a matter of course on certain developments. And so when I saw that you had a concept review this evening, I decided to join in. I've also urged other TAB members to watch because we might be more involved. So if I could ask a favor when you're doing that, because it's new to me and new probably to many other members of TAB and other board members who might be watching to learn from you this evening, if you could just be extra explicit about what's going on, what the process is, because we might actually be doing a similar thing ourselves quite soon. And so I am here to learn from you and become more involved in that process. But it is lovely to see you and a pleasure to speak with you this evening. Thank you.
Thanks. Nice to meet you too, Tila.
All right, thank you so much. It does look like that is the end of our list of public speakers for tonight. I'm going to give a quick last call for any other members of the public who wish to speak on this public hearing. You can go ahead and use the raise your hand feature. And we'll go ahead and wait 2 beats before we move on here. Okay, not seeing any other hands to raise. That ends our public hearing, and I'll turn it back to you, Harmon.
Okay, thanks again, Ryan. Next order on the agenda is discussion of dispositions, planning board call-ups and continuations. We already mentioned that we have a continuation and that Marpa House is going to be heard on the 18th in 2 weeks. So there are no continuations being heard today. The call up we have for tonight is a floodplain development permit, which is FLD 2020-00097. It's 1750 15th Street, the Olive redevelopment, which I believe we already heard the site review for that. That was the Liquor Mart redevelopment. This decision on the floodplain development permit may be called up by planning board on or before February 11th, a week from today. Are there any planning board members who wish to call up this? Any questions from planning board, or shall we move on to the public hearings? Okay, then I'm going to move on to the public hearings. So we have two public hearing items tonight, and the first one is a rezoning of the property addressed 3303 and 3305 Broadway from public, or P, to residential mixed 2, or RMX2, and adjacent rights of way to bring property into compliance with the underlying mixed density residential, or MXR, land use designation on the land use map of the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. This is case number LUR 2020-00037. I'm going to turn it over to our development review manager, Charles Farrow, and Charles, take it away.
Great, thanks very much, Harmon. Good evening, board. Sloan Walber from our team will be presenting staff's analysis this evening.
Thanks, Charles. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, great. I'll just move my window. Okay. So good evening. As you described, the item before you tonight is the proposed rezoning of the properties addressed as 3303 and 3305 Broadway and the adjacent right-of-way to residential mixed 2 zoning. Planning board is required to make a recommendation to City Council on this request. Back. The approximately 1.3 acre property is located at the northwest corner of Broadway and Hawthorne Avenue, just south of Iris Avenue. The property is adjacent to Foothill Elementary School. To give some further context, the site is on the edge of the established Newlands residential neighborhood to the west and the West Hawthorne neighborhood to the east across Broadway. These areas are zoned residential low 1 and primarily consist of single family dwellings. Agricultural uses are located directly across Broadway to the southeast at Long's Gardens, and Boulder County facilities are located to the northeast across Iris. The site contains 2 vacant structures constructed in the 1950s. It was the former location of the Broadway Baptist Church, which occupied the site until 1977, at which time the buildings were sold to the People's Clinic, which has since relocated. Just to give some background, in 2016, applications were submitted to the city for review for a site review, use review, rezoning, and land use designation change to develop the site with a mixed use development. This plan was based on a land use map change to high density residential and a rezoning to residential high 2. In January of 2017, City Council stated that they did not support this change and directed staff to look at options for a city-initiated land use map change as part of the 2015 major update to the comprehensive plan. And in response to this feedback, the applicant for the rezoning agreed to suspend the rezoning application to allow consideration through the comprehensive plan process. And through the update process, there were several public hearings and public outreach events, which included the update to the land use designation for this site and for 3 properties to the north. It was adopted in 2017, and the designation was changed to mixed density residential as part of that process, which you can see here. This land use is intended for a mix of housing types and densities. There's a limited number of complementary uses allowed. As part of the comp plan update, staff recommended this designation because it is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and existing development patterns. It's reflective of the character of the area with a diversity of housing types and at different densities. It's also consistent with several policies and the overall intent of the comprehensive plan, particularly policies related to compatibility of uses, sensitive infill and development, and a mixture of housing types. As part of their staff's recommendations, they also recommended that the zoning be changed on these properties to residential mixed 2, which is the proposal before you tonight. The current zoning of the site is public, which is reflective of those prior uses of the site by public service offices and religious uses. And they are requesting a rezoning to residential mixed 2 as well as the adjacent right-of-way. The description of the zoning is on the screen. And the rezoning was initiated by the applicant in order to seek redevelopment of the subject property. So just to give an overview of the general aspects of the RMX2 zoning, the anticipated density is 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre. The 10 dwelling units per acre would be the by right option. There is a density bonus for the provision of affordable housing, which would be considered through a site review. There's a minimum of 15% open space on the site, and 60 square feet must be provided per dwelling unit. That would be private open space. In terms of housing types, most residential uses in the use table are allowed. Some require use review. And as I described, a diversity of housing types is required. That's based on the site area, and no more than 50% can be of one housing type. In terms of review criteria, the city can grant a rezoning only if the proposed rezoning is consistent with the policy and goals of the comprehensive plan and meets one of the 6 criteria in section 9219 of the land use code. As I described, the current land use map designation of the property is public. So the applicant is seeking a rezoning based on the first criterion, which is necessary to come in compliance with the comprehensive plan land use map. And I would just point out, unlike other rezoning requests considered by the board, the proposal should be considered solely based on these criteria and not on a specific development plan. Rezoning requests do require planning board consideration and a recommendation to city council. As I just pointed out, there is no development plan proposed with this rezoning request, and a site review is not required to develop the property. However, they are eligible for a voluntary site review if desired. It's also possible that a use review could be before the board based on what types of uses are provided. And I would just point out that there is specific conditional use criteria in the land use code that contains standards for the development of land in the RMX2 zoning district with residential uses. That's mainly concerning the meeting that at least no more than 50% of one type, and then the amount of diversity provided based on the area. So in terms of process, the application followed the standard public notification with signs and mailed notice. In response to the public notice, there were some comments received which were forwarded to the board for consideration. The one key issue identified by staff is whether the rezoning request is consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan, as well as those criteria I just described. Staff does find that the proposal to rezone to RMX2 zoning meets the review criteria, since the rezoning is required to bring the property into compliance with the mixed density residential land use designation. The appropriate land use of the site was established through the comprehensive plan update, and public comments given through that process. And the RMX2 zoning designation does reflect the land use anticipated because it requires a diversity of housing types. Since the site is less than 5 acres, at least 2 housing types are required. As I described, no more than 50% of one housing type. So if the site were to be developed with market rate units at the allowable 10 dwelling units per acre, there would be no more than 13 units built on site. 3 housing types would be required in this case to ensure that that 50% threshold of one housing type was not exceeded. So based on this information, staff recommends the planning board recommend approval to council of the application, incorporating the staff memorandum and the review criteria checklist as findings of fact. And as always, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Sloan. Yeah, if you don't mind pulling down the presentation, we can see more people.
PowerPoint just locked up. All right, there we go. Ryan, are you able to bring it down for me? Thank you.
Yep,
Okay.
gotcha.
Great, thanks for doing that. Thanks for that presentation, Sloan. I saw John Gersel's hand's already up. So John, a question.
Yeah, thank you. Two things. One, I guess I should declare that I have talked with folks about this over the last several years, but I don't see that I think that I'm able to give an objective decision on this matter.
Yeah, actually, John, thanks for bringing that up. And I probably should have gotten us into our disclosures before the staff presentation. So before we go any further and any planning board members put anything on the record opinion-wise or even questions, let's go around and see if anybody needs to make any disclosures around ex parte communications or other issues. I can just say that I was on planning board when this project came in front of us as a high density residential project. And that's my only experience with this project, except driving past it on Broadway. I'll just call on people. David?
Yes, I also was on the planning board when we discussed the land use in the comp plan update. I also remember at the time getting public, I heard some public comments on the high density residential proposal, but it's been so long, I can't remember most of those discussions, but nothing that I heard back then would affect anything with my ability to be neutral and fair on this particular decision.
Okay, and I would say that I was also on planning board when we changed the land use designation through the 2015 comprehensive plan major update, and I can be fair and impartial around the review of this rezoning request as well. Peter?
My comments mirror David's in that we dealt with this at length back when we both joined, and I'm capable of impartiality and objectivity.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
And I was not part of planning board the last time this came forward. So I do not think I have anything to disclose and can be impartial.
Okay. Well, I thank you, John, for picking up on that. I appreciate that a lot. Now, do you have a question as well, or no?
Yeah, I should just add that I have walked around the area several times, and I'm a loyal alumnus of Foothills Elementary School, and so in that connection, I had a lot of contact with that area also. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. My question to staff is, to the degree that there's been any explicit consideration about the pros and cons of losing area that's zoned for public use, and to what degree that's appropriate to think about in this context.
So I think that consideration, it's a great question, John. I think that consideration was made as part of the comprehensive planning process. So when we did the initial analysis to change the land use designation, I think the analysis was conducted at that time that the site was appropriate to turn over from public zone to mixed use residential.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may add to that, because rezoning is kind of an interesting request, because if there's a general rezoning, and those sometimes come in front of you following comp plan updates, that's a legislative process. A rezoning that's requested for an individual property like this is actually a quasi-judicial process. So your decision has to be based on the code criteria in this particular case. So that's what you should be considering in your decision.
Thank you.
Any other questions, David?
I was just trying to figure out for a site over 1 acre, if there were any scenarios under which 2 housing types could be done. And it seemed like maybe if you had an even number of housing units, you could do that. And it seems like an odd differentiation in the code. It just might be a code cleanup item for the future if that's the case, because it seems pretty arbitrary that you would, if you're between 1 acre and what is it, 2.5 acres or something, that you could, if you have an even number you can do, you can get away with 2 housing types, but if you have an odd number, you do 3 housing types. So am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that the majority of land that's been developed under this has been much larger sites, so it hasn't really come up as an issue. But yes, that came up when we were looking at this application, and that seemed odd to me as well. But that is the requirement.
And it's funny too, because if the applicant chose to only put 12 on, even though 13 are allowed, they would still be required to do 3 housing types. Just an odd thing. Anyway.
No, thanks for flagging that, David. Any other questions around the staff's conclusion? All right, well, if there are no other questions from the board, then I'm going to flip it back over to Sloan in case the applicant has a presentation. And if they do, they get 15 minutes and a 3-minute rebuttal period if they require it.
So we do have representatives for the applicant here tonight. They do not have a PowerPoint, but I believe they would like to address the board.
All right, great. Let's hear from them.
This is Steve Dodd, one of the architects for the project, and we don't really have anything to add. I think the general consensus is that we want to bring the property into compliance with the comp plan, and we're in agreement with Sloan's presentation. But we're certainly here to answer any questions that the board has.
Okay, Stephen, are there going to be any other people from your team saying anything?
Only if necessary, yeah. Only if there's questions.
Okay, then,
no. Yep.
Okay, then we have the applicant's architect here. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay, all right, then not hearing any, I'm going to open it up to public comment. And I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, our moderator, to manage the public comment period. And these are for comments that are directly related to the project that's in front of us, this rezoning. And members of the public might speak 1 time per member, whoever wants to speak, and limited to 3 minutes. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, thank you. Again, if you would like to speak during this public hearing, please use the raise your hand to identify yourself. So far, we do have a few folks who are signed up, and we'll go ahead and allow our first to begin. I believe this may be Ayana. We'll go ahead and open your mic, and please go ahead and unmute yourself and share your full name.
It's Ayana Rall. Can you, am I being heard?
Yes, thank you. We can hear you, and your 3 minutes begin.
So okay, I had a question. Some people have been looking at this property for a while, but can't present anything at this moment. I don't know anything about the codes. If this RMX2 gets approved, does that preclude any possibility of a nonprofit community use in the future?
Ayana, is that all you have? Just to ask that one question?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, we don't generally do colloquies with public comment, but I don't think there's anything wrong with asking that of staff, just to take a quick look at the use table and explain what would be available under RMX. So we can have staff jump in right now, or we can go to the next member of the public and answer that question at the end.
I'm looking it up now. So
Okay.
if you want to continue, we can circle back.
Yeah, let's go to the next member of the public, and then when Sloan's ready, she can jump in.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Claudia Hansen Thyme. We'll go ahead and open your mic. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks, Ryan. Good evening, Planning Board. This is Claudia Hansen Thyme. I live at 4726 16th Street in North Boulder. I wasn't in the loop when Iris and B at this property was rejected a few years ago, so please don't construe my comment here as any comment on the merits or otherwise of that project. But I do find it somewhat disappointing to see a parcel on a major transit corridor being rezoned with what I consider a relatively low housing capacity. RMX2 zoning maxes out at 20 homes per acre. That's what we have up here in Holiday neighborhood where I live. It's a great system here, but we also know that 20 units per acre is really the minimum that we need to support regular transit on a transit corridor. I also think this is a great location here at Broadway and Iris with regard to schools, jobs, recreational facilities, etc. And so we really should not be selling the housing potential short on a site like this. I think it is good to see, after all these years, a rezoning that's hopefully going to support redevelopment on this vacant property, but I also hope that the board and the city will encourage stronger steps towards meeting our housing and climate goals in the future if this is approved. Thanks, that's all I have.
Thanks, Claudia.
All right, thank you. We don't have any other speakers who have identified themselves right now. We'll give a last call and 2 beats. Okay, there we go. Judy Nog, we'll go ahead and open up your mic. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Did that do it?
Yes,
You're
we
there.
can hear you,
Okay.
and you have 3 minutes.
Thanks. This will be very brief. I just wanted to reiterate that there's a neighborhood group, Neighbors of 3303 Broadway, and we sent you all an email. We had opposed the previous requests that the developer had presented, and we did support the land use change, and we do support this zoning change. And we would prefer that the developer make use of the permanently affordable housing because we'd really like to see some permanently affordable housing, but that's not being discussed at this particular time. That would be her decision. And I just wanted to say thank you, and we do support this.
All right, thank you, Judy. And seeing no other speakers who have identified themselves as wishing to speak, we'll end this public hearing here, and Harmon, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks. Then I'm closing public comment, and I'm going to turn it over to Sloan briefly. If Sloan, you wouldn't mind answering the member of the public's question about the uses available under the MRX2.
Sure. So if it was an office use that was providing social services similar to the People's Clinic, where there's a lot of anticipated traffic and services provided, it would be prohibited. However, if it was just a general nonprofit office, we would consider that something like a professional office, which would be allowed with a use review.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, well, now I'm going to open it up to board discussion and deliberation. And before I take hands, I'm just going to say that, just reiterate what Hella was mentioning, which is this is a quasi-judicial matter, and the criteria for rezoning are found in 9 to 19 of the code, and that's really those are the goalposts that we have to, or the guidelines that we have to stay within in reviewing this application. You know what we have here, and I know we had some members of boards who wanted to make sure that we took this very deliberately and explain things. So I'm going to take a second just to explain that our land use in the city of Boulder is really dictated in 2 ways. One, through the underlying land use designations in our comprehensive plan, and then through the actual legal zoning through our code. And so if the comprehensive plan speaks to the anticipated use of the land through land use designations, which are not the same exact thing as zoning districts, and within a given land use designation in our comprehensive plan, you have a certain number of zoning districts that are supported by that underlying land use designation. And so what we have here is we have a property that used to be designated as public under the comp plan. It was changed about 4 years ago to a mixed density residential zoning district, land use designation, but the zoning remained public. And so we're being asked whether or not we should bring the zoning into compliance with the underlying land use designation, the legal zoning for the use of the property. So I hope that little primer was valuable and didn't waste anyone's time. And I'll just open it up to planning board members to deliberate now. Any hands? Does anybody want to comment? David?
I wanted to give other people a chance to start if they wanted to, but I'm glad to go first. I do find that this is an appropriate zoning designation given the land use that was selected. This is going to help with a number of comp plan goals. Certainly the jobs, housing balance, having residential opportunities here. Yes, I would definitely support this. I will also, just since I can, voice my sympathy towards those who would like to see a little bit more intensity on places where there's transit. I understand that. That's not something that we really are ruling on today. I also, I also think that it's a little bit disappointing. It takes a long time to get things like the use table stuff that we worked on for a couple of years implemented, because there are some restrictions now still in place that I was hoping with our use table subcommittee might loosen. We won't be able to have without, I don't think that a convenience store or a coffee shop are allowed at all in the current use tables. So if the applicant wanted to put in something a little mixed use near the intersection of Iris and Broadway, that would be ruled out at this point. So it's just kind of a plug to keep moving forward to try to make sure that we, you know, when we have areas like this that we'd like to see become a little bit more walkable neighborhoods and more transit oriented, that we continue to work on the legislative things that will get us there. But given where we are at, I think this is the right designation and I would support it.
Well, David, I don't know if I could possibly agree with you more, so thanks for those comments. And I would just say that in reviewing the criteria for rezoning in section 9219 of our code, I agree with the staff in that the applicant has demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence that the proposed rezoning is necessary to bring the zoning into compliance with the underlying comp plan land use designation. I also would say that you know, the other criteria which were registered as not applicable in the staff report, if we needed more than one criterion to be met, I think we could probably also make a reasonable argument that the proposed rezoning is necessary in order to provide land for a community need that wasn't anticipated at the time of the adoption of the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. You know, maybe that's not applicable because we already, at the most recent adoption of the comp plan, decided that this should be a mixed density residential. So I'm going to agree that this meets the criteria for approval, or recommendation of approval, I should say, to City Council, because this is going to have to be changed by ordinance and we're a recommendatory authority. Anybody else? Negative poll, does anybody believe? Oh, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I support staff's recommendation for this. And I think that the criteria have been demonstrated to be met. I would say just in general that I regret anytime we lose land devoted to public use. And that's my only source of regret in this, but otherwise I think the criteria have been met and therefore I support staff's recommendation.
Okay, so is there anyone on planning board who does not support staff's recommendation? Is the board ready to make a motion? Lisa, you're shaking your head. Would you like to make the motion?
I don't have the language pulled right up in front of me, so I shouldn't. put
You can
myself
wait
up.
for a
I'll
second
second it.
if you would like. If you have your packet open, the motion language is on page 2 of 26.
Yes, scrolling up. I was reading down below for staff information. You said 2 of 48?
Yeah, page 2 of 26 in the
Oh, okay. I'm
agenda
just
item 4. So it's the second page.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect.
Sloan put it up for you.
I will move to recommend to City Council approval of the application to rezone 1.3 acres of land located at 3303 and 3305 Broadway from the public P zone district to residential mixed R or RMX-2.
Can I get a second?
I would second that.
Okay, and that's David Ensign seconding it. Is there any discussion to the motion? Okay, then I will make this a motion of planning board. Planning board moves to recommend to City Council approval of the application to rezone 1.3 acres of land located at 3303 and 3305 Broadway from the public zone district to residential mix 2. Take a roll call vote now. David?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. So the recommendation to City Council passes 5-0. Congratulations to the applicant and thank you for a great presentation, Sloan. All right, what time is it? We're at 6:53, so I think let's press on to our second public hearing item unless staff needs a quick break to reset any technology. Looks like staff's ready to go. So Charles, I'll turn it over to you for item 4B.
Great, thanks very much. Elaine McLaughlin will be presenting staff's analysis on this application tonight.
Very good. Thanks, Charles. I'm going to share the screen here. Before we begin for our discussion this evening, it's important to note, of course, that this is a concept plan review and the intent is to provide feedback to the applicant team. There's no decision of approval or denial, and the topics that are covered can include land use, architecture, transportation, and really the emphasis is placed on the context of where the proposal is. So for a brief overview this evening, we'll go over the built planning and transportation context, brief summary of the proposed project, and then there's a couple of key issues that staff is recommending for discussion. So regarding the context, the site itself is located near the interchange of Baseline with Highway 36, where essentially it transitions to 28th Street as it banks to the north. So you can see from the image approaching the site on the south, and because the highway is elevated in this location, it's highly visible from the roadway. Surroundings of the site include high density residential to the north and east of the site, office and retail to the south, and it's located within a 1/4 mile walking distance of the CU main campus, as well as a number of other commercial office uses, including grocery store, coffee shops, restaurants, bike shops, everything from insurance agents and medical dental offices and other uses. So for the site itself, it's essentially a little less than 3.5 acres. And on the west side, there's an existing Best Western motel. It was originally built as the Royal Inn and Jolly King Restaurant in 1970. You can see the black and white image there, lower left-hand corner. And the rear of the property is a 5-story office building. It was constructed sometime around 1970. And it's associated with local architect Hobart Wagner. We've seen quite a few things of his recently. For the planning context, the site's designated under the BBCP as transitional business with characteristics shown essentially of being near intersections or along major roadways or streets, in this case, of course, 28th, and to provide a transition from those streets to residential areas. It's defined as having a mix of uses, and that includes housing. And then on the right side of the screen, there's several BBCP policies that the proposal would support for residential uses in the city, including policy 1.10, jobs, housing balance, which speaks to the need to offset in commuting. There's other relevant policies, of course, including mixed use and higher density on transit corridors, commitment to a walkable city, sensitive infill and redevelopment, physical design for people, and enhanced design for the built environment. Many of these policies speak to a pedestrian-oriented context. And then consistent with the BVCP land use, the zoning on the sites, business transition 1, BT1, and there's a similar defined purpose of the zoning as being areas that, excuse me, that generally buffer a residential area from a major street. And it's primarily used for commercial, as well as complementary residential and office uses. So regarding the proposed mixed use project and some of the BT zoning standards, density for residential uses is based on provision of 1,200 square feet of open space per dwelling unit, and 20% open space for office and retail, and those can be essentially shared. Office is a by right use, retail and restaurant is a by right use, with the caveat that if the outdoor seating area for the restaurant or cafe is greater than 300 square feet within that 500 feet of the RH5, the residential zoning district, you do need to do a use review. And then attached residential is considered a limited one, L1 use that's allowed by right if it is not on the ground floor facing a street. Otherwise, it's also a use review. And we'll talk a little bit more about the zoning and the use in key issue 1. And then in terms of transportation context, the sites within a quarter to half mile is several dozen bus stops that serve, pardon me, a host of bus lines. And it's in a quarter mile to half mile walking distance to a significant number of retail and services, including up to Basemar Shopping Center to the west of 28th there. And the site is in an area where it's really important to note that over the past dozen years or so, the city's made significant improvements that are focused on alternative transportation, including bike paths, transit stops, pedestrian underpasses. There's quite an artistic and playful design character to some of those amenities. Improved lighting and a multi-use path on the west side of 28th from Colorado to Baseline. And then similarly, based on the 28th Street Frontage Road Connections Plan, and that was adopted in the mid-2000s, there were construction of a number of residential projects along the frontage road that helped to implement and construct quite a number of the connection and pedestrian and bike connections that were part of this frontage plan, with the goal that these connections be pedestrian friendly, safe and convenient to transit, a rich diversity of different types of transportation facilities, and also to provide minimum standards for those improvements. And then at the time the corridor plan was adopted, it was adopted in concert with a comprehensive rezoning that the city had initiated for the area that's now RH3. It had been BT1, and there were a number of motel uses that occurred along that corridor. This particular property and the property that's to the north that at the time had been the Boulder Outlook Hotel opted not to participate in the rezoning, but in essence, the idea was to allow for greater intensity of residential, knowing that it would probably be student apartments, to relieve some of that pressure off single family residential areas in University Hill and Goss Grove and Whittier that we're seeing an increasing number of conversions to student rentals of single family homes. And then the higher density next to the campus, along with the connectivity improvements, it's helpful to realize that these types of improvements have contributed to a decrease over time of the single occupant vehicles used by CU students, as was found in a recent travel diary survey that the city has done periodically. that shows nearly 72% of students don't use an SOV for all trips, and over 55% actually use biking, walking, and transit. And then, so on to the project and the site itself. The applicant's proposing a mixed-use development that includes 92 student apartments, a proposed corner cafe and leasing office with the existing 5-story. It's about 16,000 square foot office building that's going to remain on the east. The site includes interior courtyard spaces, open lawn and garden spaces, as well as rooftop deck and pool. The proposed building is shown in a couple of renderings as 3 stories. It has a contemporary style, finished materials of brick, wood, and metal. And then this illustrates the 3 floors that are proposed, as well as the below grade parking. On the site, there's a total of 172 spaces shown in concept, where 326 would be required based on a bedroom count, 3 spaces per 4-bedroom unit. And so that would equate to a 49% parking reduction. At the time of site review, the applicant, of course, will need to provide a robust TDM that indicates how the alt mode usage would be implemented. And then for key issue 1, in terms of the proposed mix of uses and primary student apartments, it's helpful to look at the BT1 zoning context again, within which the site is located. The existing broader BT1 zoning district aligns 28th Street and Baseline. It's essentially like an L shape or an elbow, so to speak, about 11 acres. And you can see there's office and retail uses that align the corridor, and then residential up above. And again, it was intended to serve as a transition to residential, essentially as a buffer from those major streets to the residential to the south and east. And staff notes, however, that this mix of uses with some limited retail could also serve that function as a transition, and that existing non-residential uses would still exist along Baseline. And then regarding the BT zoning, there's a relatively recent use review requirement that I mentioned for ground floor residential facing a street. And in reviewing that staff memo for that code change, the intent was noted to try and maintain potential for retail uses and enable more opportunities for retail where possible in business zones. So in that regard, staff notes that the proposed small coffee shop on the corner helps to support those goals. And in addition, while the allowance for ground floor residential obviously will be fully vetted in a use review, it's important to note that the site-specific context for the retailer cafe in this location is probably best suited to where it's proposed, and it's closest to existing office nearby. It's also important to take a look at the context in terms of where you would put additional retail. Generally, retail likes to have some sort of synergy with other retail to function and add that activity level. And in this case, because it faces that, which is essentially the abutment for the highway, you can't get that across the street type of synergy. So in essence, to have residential facing that could provide some privacy. They've also provided a fairly large landscape setback in that location. And it would be consistent with those U Club apartments to the north. And then for the ground floor facing the south, where the 28th Street frontage sort of rounds the corner, that's a fairly quiet, less traveled street. And so it would, again, probably be an appropriate location for residential, not incompatible with the use across the street for office. So then regarding key issue 2 in the open space elements for both users on the site, in the BT1 zoning district, both density and required open space for residential uses are calculated at 1,200 square feet of open space per dwelling unit, and office uses, as I noted, are calculated 10 to 20% depending on the height. And so in this particular case, there's a requirement of 110 1,400 square feet of open space. And that 20% for the office works out to be about 30,000 square feet. The open space is expected to be shared, and obviously, given the demographics between office users and then student residents, it's very likely that the open space will still just remain around those particular uses. There's some open space that's clearly oriented more toward the student apartments, like the pool area and such, but there's things like pickleball and a bocce court that's proposed that could function for both of the users. The intent in the code really is that it meets the needs of both the residential and non-residential users, the residents, the occupants, tenants, and visitors. So as long as it provides and meets the needs for those users, then the open space could be shared or could be could meet the land use code. And then finally, in terms of public notice, staff received a couple comment letters during the review period. Mostly just came in the last few days. One was from a person who indicated support, and the other was from Community Cycles that offered some thoughts about the multi-use path. And with that, are there questions for staff?
Does anybody on the board have any questions for staff? John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, two things. One, I'd be interested in staff's response to the letter from Community Cycles about the multi-use and bike and walking path close to where the cafe is proposed. And the other is, and it pertains to the same thing, the degree to which there would be a permeability of this space for the public.
Okay, great questions. For the first one, we did take a look at some of the concerns that Community Cycles had about a multi-use path in general not being amenable necessarily for bicyclists. And in the email, it noted that there's a number of driveways that can be very dangerous when you're in this area. And one of the things I did want to clarify, because I went back to look at the specifics of the driveways, is with the two that are on the site itself, they're proposed to be closed. So access into the motel and the main entry, and then the northern access are both intended to be closed. And then there's a sidewalk and then another sidewalk on the north end between apartment buildings. And then there is one driveway that would remain. So it may not be as challenging as originally thought, given that these driveways are going to be closed and it's essentially going to come down to one driveway. And then it's also important to note that just past that location, there's on-street bike lanes. So a number of the improvements that were implemented from that 28th Street frontage road connections plan really helped to make it more amenable to all modes of traffic. That was the intent, or all modes of transportation, rather, bicycling and walking, and et cetera. So that's the first take on it. We did just receive that email yesterday. So, you know, that was just the initial take on it. Hopefully that helps. And then John, remind me of your second question.
Yeah, that was dealing with the permeability of the public to get through that area, both in a north-south direction and east-west.
Yep, and so there is an existing multi-use path that's on the adjacent U Club, or not multi-use path, rather. It's a sidewalk, and that's part of that, again, that 28th Street connections plan that was implemented. And this is intended to then connect into it. And hopefully you can see my cursor there for north-south, similarly with the walkway that goes along that southern portion of the frontage road. And then in terms of permeability to from north to south, they're showing access coming into the site. There's a walkway that comes in, and then this is intended to be a fire access lane. And my understanding in recent conversations with the applicant is that fire department has said that's not necessary to be that far into the site. So there may be opportunities that maybe the applicant could talk about of making that connection a little bit more beefed up.
Can I just follow up with a question?
Yeah.
On
right
that
ahead.
part, on where you just pointed out where the fire department said that maybe some revision is possible, it doesn't look like that is the connection goes through all the way to the street on the south side there, or do I misunderstand the significance of some of the map coloring?
Possibly. There is this, and it's probably a little hard to see from my screen, but there is this walkway that comes straight back towards the office building and then continues as part of the essentially an auto court, so to speak, which again, for a fire access lane, it's essentially not in use most of the time. So I think that was the supposition, is that it could essentially serve as an open space area unless it's needed by the fire department. But I think that's a good question for the applicant, because they had the most recent conversation with our fire staff who said probably don't need to go all the way to the north with a large fire lane.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay. Any other members of planning board with questions for staff? Ready to provide the applicant their 15 minutes? Okay.
Disclosure.
Oh, did I do it again? Sorry about that. All right, but sorry, Peter, thank you for pointing that out. We need to do our disclosures. So I'll start by saying that I live nearby and know the site well from walking past it, driving past it many, many times, but I have no other disclosures to make. And Lisa.
I'm generally familiar with the site, but no direct conflicts or anything else to disclose.
David.
Yeah, I also live not too far away from the site, so I know it. And I did do a bike around today just to get a feel for the bike permeability that exists right now in the area.
Okay, Peter.
Similar to our chair's disclosures at times, as he's a real estate attorney and a member of the real estate community, as a real estate professional, I have occasion to consult on projects outside of Boulder that include members of this team, but it does not render me unable to be impartial.
I want to give Hella a second to jump in case she wants to specifically ask you any questions around this. Hella.
Yeah, Peter, you don't have any current contracts with any members of these teams?
I do not.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter, and thanks for picking up on that and picking me up. I appreciate that. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been in the area a lot, but I have no other disclosures.
Okay. And, you know, generally it has been planning board's practice to do disclosures even at the concept plan level, though it's arguable as to whether it's really required. So appreciate that extra information. Always good to have more sunlight. So now I'll turn it back to staff, and I think they're going to turn it over to the applicant. If nobody wants to jump in, Adrian, you've got 15 minutes. And if you want after public comment, you can have 3 more if there's anything you want to rebut.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, can you see the screen?
Yep, looks great.
So I'm Adrian Sofer Sparn Architects, 1731 15th Street in Boulder, and I'm going to invite Rob Bach, speaking for the property owner applicant, to begin this presentation.
Thank you, Adrian. Planning Board, pleasure to be back with you again. My name is Rob Bach with Core Spaces, 1643 North Milwaukee Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Just want to give you a quick refresher on Core. We were last with you on our other proposed project on a different part of town and the Old Boulder project at 15th and Canyon. This is a very different product type than what we were proposing over there. We think this location is obviously very well suited towards our student housing flagship brand hub on campus. So what we're proposing here is a Hub Boulder. And we feel this location along the bookend of 28th Street is well positioned. It's highly connected, as Elaine pointed out, both from a pedestrian standpoint, all the bus route, and really bike friendly to campus, which we're really excited about. On this page here, I just want to share some of our representative images of some of our other projects from around the nation. It really just kind of emphasize our kind of deep focus on design and try to be really contextual with our local context. So, we spent a lot of time with Silver Spartan architects, analyzing the site, and think we've got a really thoughtful approach to our approach for this design of this site, which we're really excited about. And Adrian, if you flip to the next slide. I want to just point out some of the, some of our interior and exterior amenity offerings of some of our other hub projects. And really, I want to point this out because for this project, the focus and the driver and really the opportunity here is the open space, which Carol from Studio Terra will be getting into later, and which we think will really set this project apart from a lot in the area, and we'll make this project truly exciting for the future. So Adrian, with that, love for you to hand it back to you to get into the proposal. So I really appreciate everyone's time and available for any other questions as we get further along. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to state the obvious, this is one of the highest density areas of the city relative to housing, being as it is on the east side of the campus across 28th Street and US 36. A lot of it is student housing, but it is not student housing alone. Our project is on the southern end of this, and it is not the same zoning district as that which is north of it, but it is a lot of student housing in this area. So I want to go through some of the parameters that we looked at to establish what we've done. And one of the key ones, of course, is that this being right in the bend at US 36, it's one of the first projects you'll see, one of the first things you'll see as you come into town. So US 36 overlooking this site has an impact on that which is overlooked, which is that there's a 28-foot high separation in grade between the wall at the top of US 36 and the bottom of it across from this site. You can see the Best Western on the left there, and the scale of the human being is significantly smaller than what's across the street. At the same time, because of its location, we have a tremendous opportunity to pick up on some views towards the mountains to the southwest and west. But today, this site actually is highly given over to the automobile. As a housing project, however, in the BT zone, we have to provide a significant amount of open space in order to have residential units. It in fact forces this to turn into a site that is really, a lot of it is covered by open space because we have to have 1,200 square feet per dwelling unit in the BT zone, which is a tremendous amount higher than what you'll find in the housing to the north of it. You can see right above is the U Club project on the left side of the site to the north, and to the right side is the parking lot associated with Spanish Towers, and we can come back and talk about that a little later relative to connections, which I know Mr. Gersel had raised the point of. Also affecting the design of this site is the 10-foot drop in grade along 28th Street itself. So as you come down from Spanish Towers to this site, it drops significantly. And you can see the slope change here along the wall too. This is also relatively significant that within the property, between the office building that's remaining and the Best Western site, there is a bench, a grade drop of about 5 feet. And the reason this is significant is that when you start planning this site, the way that height is measured in the city of Boulder, when you get within 25 feet of a grade change, it highly affects your ability to go up 35 feet, which is the maximum height in this zone. So we started by planning this site by looking at how that bench affects our first floor or the perimeter of the property. Likewise, on the west side, that grade change of 10 feet that we looked at earlier, as you slope down from the northwest corner to the southwest corner, that 10 feet would mean that a significant portion of the property, if we do go all the way out to the street with our building, would be buried. Because if we start our low point here at the top of this bench, that's going to be, you can see the grade contours across here. Each of those affect our ability to go up 35 feet. So where we start out at, say, the base floor elevation here and going up 35 feet, we're going to lose a whole floor by the time we get to the west side. I hope this doesn't seem too arcane, but I just wanted to walk you through our process of development on this site. So since we are low on the east end, it makes it a lot easier to get into below grade parking zone, one level down, if we enter it on the low end. Right now, there are two entrances of driveways on the western side. There's also one on the southwest. But by using the entry that's existing today on the far eastern side of the bench we talked about, we can get down below a lot faster, and thereby allowing us to not have driveway cuts in the other parts of the site. The other thing, as we talked about earlier, was the amount of open space that we have to provide in order to provide any reasonable amount of housing on the property. So we carved out that block and created courtyards to create light and air into residential units and provide the maximum amount of perimeter that benefits those units facing open space. And in so doing, what was once previously parking is essentially being turned into open space. And then relative to the gateway view and the views to the mountains to the west, we put all of our amenities and our sort of social gathering areas that were not outdoor on the southwest corner facing the view. So this is just zooming in on that area. And we canted it slightly towards that view zone. So it took advantage of the opportunity to pick up the mountain views, but also created an indentation, a kind of a crease into which we put the main entry of the building. And take advantage in that manner of by placing on the top deck, the opportunity for views towards the mountains, as well as common gathering rooms on that top floor. So then dropping down to look at that from a little lower, this is the main entry, and it's actually an outdoor entry that opens directly to the courtyards. And to the left is the coffee shop amenity that serves more like a kind of a coffee co-working space, similar to what we have today at Galvanized. So this is actually the Galvanized space, and it will be very similar. And above that then is the pool deck. And that leads to the images that you have in your packet that shows the common spaces looking out towards the southwest and taking that opportunity towards to take advantage of the views in that area. And you can see what that is intended to feel like. Briefly, a little bit about materials, and we're still in the development of this. And of course, we're looking to see this develop a lot further as we go into site review. But taking advantage of opening towards the west with the roof that opens up and a more screen-like material so you can see through it, while we have some degree of masonry as well as wood or wood-like materials, depending on what we can still get that will last, and creating a public face that is it's an outdoor area that can serve as outdoor seating and gathering areas that faces towards the south, the sun, and the views. It is actually separated from the multi-use path by landscaping. So I think that I don't think that there's a concern there particularly. This is not a highly traveled street. I think you all have been down 28th Street in this area. There's not a lot going on there. And the courtyards will we'll be talking about in a moment, but I think you have all of these plans that you've looked at very briefly earlier, but we'll continue to develop these. And I don't know, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So from the perspective of being brief, I'm just going to move through it and come back to whatever you may wish to discuss. These two cross sections were not in your packet, but we thought it might be useful. The one up above is showing the U Club on the left. You can see they're a full story above us. They are actually 55 foot high, but like us, they measure their height from a low point on the eastern side of the site. So it's 4 stories plus, I believe, a roof deck. Whereas we are 3 stories and the grade slopes down that 10 feet we talked about earlier. This section below is through the 2 courtyards, and it's towards the southern portion of the site, so the grade doesn't show up as drastic. You can see the building beyond, and U Club in back of that is the taller element. And on the right side of this drawing is the existing office building, which is actually about 55 feet high. I want to talk briefly about the 2 key points that was raised by staff, the project site and ground level housing, which we will be applying for as a part of a use review. In this same zone, there are multiple 55-foot high housing structures, and there, I believe, are no ground floor commercial uses in those. The project site, we are proposing an enlivening activity on the street side towards the south, even though it's not consistent with the requirement of the BT1 zone to have ground floor commercial on all street facing facades. But doing so in this area, we believe is not viable for a number of reasons. Number one, it doesn't actually have a lot to support it, as I believe staff had said, in terms of compatible ground floor commercial uses, either across the street from it or down the street from it. And in fact, the closest qualifying retail would be, and I'm not sure it is qualifying, the gas station, which has some convenience retail. And then across the street from that are retail uses. But each of these retail uses, where they even exist, are all surrounded by parking. It is not a pedestrian-oriented retail environment. And there's good reason for that, is that that kind of shift has not been invested in over the years. So I think that we have a good case for saying that what we are providing here is appropriate to the street level activity. And I'm going to let Carol Adams, our landscape architect, talk a little bit more about open space and the use of open space in support of housing here. Carol, I don't know if you need to unmute.
Thank you, Adrian. Good evening, everybody. I'm Carol Adams with Studio Terra, 758 Club Circle in Louisville. As been previously mentioned, BT1 zoning requires a significant amount of open space, and the project will have over 2.5 acres of usable space, which is similar in size to a neighborhood park. 2 calculations are looked at. One is the housing, which requires the 1,200 square feet per unit. And then, as Elaine alluded to, the office use, you look at 20% of the overall site as required. So can you go to the next slide, please, Adrian? I don't expect you to get into this chart, but this more detailed calculation shows what is counted toward open space per code. And I think the thing to note here, which is significant, is that the office users would have access to over 75,000 square feet of open space, where only 30,000 square feet is required. And the 75,000 does exclude the courtyards, balconies, internal open space, and roof deck that are dedicated to the students and probably wouldn't even want to be visited by the office users. Next slide, please. So to just get into a little bit more detail about the open space concept, and John brought up the question of connections. We are making a number of connections. We're providing a multi-use path along the west side, connecting and creating, kind of filling in a critical missing link. Along the south side, there's no sidewalk today, and we're providing a city sidewalk to city standards, along with a tree lawn and on-street parking where no on-street parking exists today. Staff has requested an east-west connection on the north. There is an east-west connection currently on the U Club to the north, and we don't think it makes sense to make a parallel connection right next to it. And doing so would preclude the ability to buffer between the two high-density projects, housing projects. And the amenity package, it's really been designed to look at both users of the property. The open space and recreational amenities include a variety of outdoor spaces and plazas for dining, working, studying, and lounging. Recreational amenities, including bocce and pickleball, which is becoming the fastest growing sport in the United States. Numerous pollinator gardens that will filter stormwater, and generous amounts of open space landscape areas. Our firm has been doing a lot of research into workplace transformation and healthy workplaces as part of what's happening with COVID. And we are working with the city on the facilities master plan and have been for over a year. And what we're finding is that people office workers are desperate for outdoor working spaces, which in our climate is ideal. We can be outside a lot of times, a lot of times of the year. So you'll notice there's a lot of little places for outdoor meetings and outdoor work that could also be used for outdoor study. We do think
Thank you. I do want to mention we're at our 15-minute time limit here.
Okay, I got just a couple more things to say. I did want to talk about this hammerhead. This area in dark gray is the access to the underground parking and also some ADA parking spaces for the office building. Originally, we thought we needed to bring fire access all the way to the north, to almost to the parking lot of Spanish Towers. But we've learned within the last couple of days that they don't need to go any farther than what's shown in the dark gray. So what that does is opens up a huge amount of the property to look at other open space amenities, softscape and landscape, while still providing, north, south and east, west connections, as many as possible. You can see it's quite permeable with all of these pathways and walkways shown. That's it.
If I could just mention that we are working with staff in relation to meeting the requirements of the adopted connections plan for this area. And so I'm happy to talk about that more if you would like us to.
Thank you.
Don't drop the screen yet. This is our time to ask some questions of the applicant. I'm going to ask just first one. That little sort of mauve tan path that comes in on the middle of the north property boundary, is that to connect to the east-west connection at the University Club north of there?
Yes, I mean, that was, we don't have any control over our neighbor's property, but just looking at topography and, kind of desire lines of a pedestrian, that was that intent. Because right now that path on U Club kind of dumps you right into the Spanish Towers parking lot, which is still pedestrian accessible. It's just not, a designated sidewalk.
So you don't believe that there's any kind of public access easement along your northern property boundary where that current sidewalk is on the south side of U Club?
Well, there is a public access easement there for that sidewalk, but to make the connection, you're talking about, making a connection on somebody else's property. So something would have to facilitate that.
And I believe, Carol, that connection today dumps into that driveway at Spanish Towers.
It does. It dumps into the parking lot and drive lane.
We actually question the necessity for the additional link, which really just takes out landscaping, buffering between the two housing projects, but also we don't believe we have the right to demand that connection.
Okay. All right. Well, you can feel free to drop this screen now and we'll open it up to other planning board members' questions. Peter?
Hi, thank you. Carol, you'd mentioned the hammerhead turnaround and the change in how far the fire needed to go north. Are you saying that hammerhead turnaround is going to be different than what's shown on the current plan based on the
It's
information?
gonna go away. It's gonna literally go away.
So it'll be shaded. It'll look very different.
It'll look very different. Yeah, we're very excited about it. We think there's a much better use than, I was a landscape architect for U Club and we did we had to do a hammerhead there. It's a very, very nice hammerhead. It's probably the nicest in town, but there's better uses for that quantity of, square footage. So we're excited about that change.
We'll retain it as open space, basically.
Oh, it'll be open space, but it'll be, patios and gardens and pathways as opposed to 24 feet wide of, something.
Sure. At the risk of pushing us 30 seconds longer, but acknowledging what Tila had said, could you define hammerhead real quick? Because we all started using it without defining it, and people may think we're talking about an aquarium.
You want me to do it?
Please.
A hammerhead is basically just a dead end. Look, if you picture a fire truck driving into a property to fight a fire, there has to be a way. If it's longer than, X number of feet, they can back out. But when it gets longer, they don't like to back out. And so code requires a turnaround. And so basically, you would basically turn left or right and then back up along that long piece, that's running east-west and then come back out. So that's what a hammerhead is.
Thank you. Last question, if I can do one more, Harmon, or should I wait?
No, you can go ahead, Peter, if you want.
Okay. I feel like John here asking a water question, but on the site, how does this site manage stormwater and detention and drainage, those topics? I see a lot of green space, but I didn't see like the large bowl that I'm used to seeing.
Charlie Hager here from JVA, if you want to take that, Charlie.
Sure, this is Charlie Hager, JVA for 1319 Spruce in Boulder, Colorado. So right now, the majority, say the western third, 2/3 of the site, basically just sheet flows right off the site onto the South Road and eventually goes down to Skunk Creek down there without any detention, without any water quality. The parking lot for the office building pretty much does the same thing, as these were developed before a lot of the current codes. So what we're going to be able to do, the plan now is to gather as much as possible, and the codes really want us to get 100% of the water, but they allow for, with some understanding that some of the fringe around the right-of-way may not make it there. But the plan is to gather the water, take it to the southeast corner, and there's a grassy area between the office building and the South Drive. And I think it's, let me, if I can get back to the screen here. That'll be per the city standards, working with Edward Stafford and his team, a regulatory detention and water quality area to treat the water quality before releasing it.
And we do have a number of other smaller water quality areas that we like to design as pollinator gardens as well. And so those are kind of sprinkled throughout in the kind of brighter green, if you can see that, color.
Thank you.
Other planning board members with questions, John?
Yeah, I continue to be interested in the permeability in both east-west and north-south. And although you've pointed out potential issues, you haven't made any sort of commitment on what you're willing to do in terms of both directions for public permeability. So I'd be interested to hear a little more about that.
Well, I think that there is an adopted connections plan in this area that staff pointed out. And, in terms of making a connection in the north-south direction, which I think you're raising, there's, we're not keeping people from going into this zone that you identified earlier as a possible connection point. But the question in my mind has to be, what are we connecting to? And in terms of taking people through this site, we don't actually have a problem with that. But there is no associated connection required on our neighboring property. And there is a street that is, in fact, the main link of sidewalk going north-south along 29th Street, both past Spanish Towers and to, the shopping down in the Baseline East Shopping Center. So I'm not quite sure what we can do. If you're talking about this connection possibly going north, I don't know that it's going anywhere in particular in that parking lot. And in terms of going south, likewise, there's a stream across the street which actually runs through here. So there's no link beyond the possibility that we're giving, which is to enter the site.
Can I add to that? I do think this southern sidewalk that doesn't exist today is going to be a key east-west connection. And if you're looking at the aerial like you've got it shown, there's a number of these. The idea is that you'd be able to walk through this property. If Elaine, can you go back to, or whoever's driving?
I'm driving. Where do you want to go?
Go back to like the aerial photo. You see how there's a parking lot that wraps around the office building? That's going to become a variety of walking paths. So if you wanted to, quote unquote, take a shortcut through this property or walk through the gardens, you'd be able to, because there would be connections. You know, there's no mid-block connection east-west because of the residential building, but there's a connection existing on the north, a new connection on the south, and then a way to infiltrate, you know, through these, this very large landscape area that I mentioned was like the size of a, and without that hammerhead thing, you know, those will feel more like walking paths rather than a large paved surface. So I think we're providing quite a bit of permeability, actually.
I mean, from the point of view of the activity we're looking at here, this is more like a park than a path.
Does that answer your question, John?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I did get your response, so thank you.
Okay, other planning board members, let me spread out my view here. Okay, then I see that, I didn't see which one of you guys got your hand up first. So I'm gonna go with Lisa first and then David and then Peter.
So I just wanted to, there's something that stood out to me that staff also did a really nice job of calling out, and that is kind of the shared nature of the open space in the plan. And so I guess I mostly just, a question for you, I guess, is how would you respond, you know, to some concerns about some of those areas, and is that really going to be usable by, you know, office workers who are maybe trying to take a call outside or have a meeting outside, and then at the same time we have young college students who are trying to have a nice time. You know, how is that really going to work in a shared environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer, I mean, the site lays out almost perfectly to allow for both of those uses to coexist. There's a lot of internal facing open space for the students, and that those will be readily accessible courtyards that are contained. The bulk of the park-like setting is really around the office building, and you can see a number of small seating areas and plazas intentionally designed for those office workers to come out and use those. So I think if a student is going to come out and go somewhere to study, you know, their first choice might be the courtyard because it's closer, and the office users will, I think, have not first dibs, but they will go to the places that are closest to them. So I think we're providing an incredible amenity for the office users. And then I do think that these more active recreational uses that are, again, closer to the office building will be inviting for them. I think, you know, I could see, you know, at a lunch break going out and playing a little pickleball or doing a little bocce or something like that. So I do think the layout of the property lends itself very well to letting these two uses coexist. You know, we did a project years ago, the Carillon, over on Boulder, south side of Boulder Creek. That's in the middle. It's a senior housing project in the midst of student housing, And the gardens there were intentionally designed for permeability and to allow the students to walk through and commingle with the residents there. And we've heard nothing in the decade or so since that was built. We've heard nothing but compliments about that kind of co-mingling and cross-pollination between different users. So I'm not worried about it at all. I think it's going to be an incredible amenity for both populations.
Okay, David.
Yes, just was curious about the the unit types. I see a lot of 2 and 3 bedroom units, but then I just wanted to confirm. It looks like there's 5 2-level 4-bedroom units on the east side, and I just I wanted to see, are those the only 5 of that size, or were there some that I might have missed? I was just kind of curious.
I'm sure Rob could speak to this more, but fundamentally they're all 4-bedroom units with individual lock-off, presumably for each unit, for each bedroom, for each student. Rob, do you want to speak more to this?
No, I think that, yeah, it's exactly right. These will all be 4-bedroom units. There'll be sort of a mix of, whether we have ensuite, off-suite, so there'll be some differentiation amongst the 4-bedroom units. But you did spot that well. The ones along the east side are actually 2-level duplex units. So gonna be pretty, really pretty cool units that'll face off that side and have generous balconies like all the rest of the units. So it should be pretty interesting ones.
The reason those are two-story units is because the ground does slope a good 10 feet from west to east. So we can maintain the entry on the upper level of that 2-story unit, but the ground level is actually coming out at grade. So they can walk out at the lower level to the open space adjacent to it.
Great, thank you for that.
Peter, you had another?
Yes, at the risk of having the applicant tell me that they're complying with the already stringent energy code, can you tell me anything else about energy, sustainability, embodied carbon, choice of materials, PV?
We're going to comply with all the requirements of the Boulder Energy Code without question, including PV. And we have a compact form. We are providing a tremendous amount of carbon-eating green space. Rob, would you like to say anything more about that at this point?
I think you nailed it, Adrian.
Well, then,
but it is something that we will be, very focused on, and we've really learned a lot with our first project, Olive, to really get into the Boulder Energy Code and understanding kind of the pushing and pulling out of all the elements. So, it's gonna be a big focal point here that we'll be digging into as we get into further design development along our path.
And we see this as a very much a walkable community of residents, walkable and biking community. We're going to be providing significantly more bike parking than is required by the code, because everybody that's a student in this area has a bike.
Peter, go ahead.
So looking at the representative images here, I understand what you're going for. It's pleasing. And so when I bring up art and that sort of intervention, I'm not saying this is a candidate for edgy, graffiti street art, but it is a part of town that you're not going to get neighbors complaining about art. And I'd love to encourage you to think about things you can do on site that really draw out youthful energy and art. And it's such a beautiful site in terms of the way Studio Terra has laid it out and compared to what it is now. So I hope you have a good program for art.
That's a great comment. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. We'll definitely be looking into that. I really appreciate that comment.
Wrapping up the meeting.
Yeah, are you thinking of unbundling parking and rent here?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other planning board questions? If not, we'll go to public comment. Okay, let's go to public comment.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Bring down these slides here. And then if you do have a public comment, please go ahead and raise your hand. The first community member we have speaking here is Kurt Nordbach. Kurt, I'll go ahead and open up your mic here.
Hi, Kurt Nordbach speaking on behalf of Community Cycles. Thank you for reading our comments. As always, we comment solely on aspects of these projects that relate specifically to transportation. I have a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. First of all, there was just some discussion on parking. We didn't see in the plans any long-term bike parking marked. If we do the calculations right, it looks like the city requirements are for about 135 long-term bike parking spaces. We feel that that's definitely inadequate. We think that there should be one per bedroom, basically one per student. And obviously there needs room for that. And so in exchange, we would support a greater parking reduction, motor vehicle parking reduction than the 44% proposed to free up space in that parking area in the basement for more long-term bike parking. Secondly, in terms of permeability, we strongly support a north side connection. It wasn't totally clear to us what the plan was. The transportation network plan there very clearly indicates a north side sidewalk connection. And so we feel that that is absolutely necessary for permeability. Last thing I want to talk about the idea that we raised of instead of doing the multi-use path, doing a one-way cycle track with then an adjoining or a separate sidewalk that maybe would be a little narrower than the multi-use path. And in our letter, we showed an image, a representative image of that. So our concern, the staff responded, thanks to John for bringing this up. Staff responded, partly our concern is the driveway crossings, but really the bigger concern is the conflict between bikes and pedestrians on multi-use paths. If you've ever walked, as I'm sure you all have, on the Broadway path on the west side of campus, when, you know, in between classes, when it's full of people walking and biking, it gets to be kind of a mess. And there really ideally should be greater separation. And we're hoping for that same level of traffic here because that means all those people won't be in their cars. And so we feel that this idea of a one-way cycle track with a separate sidewalk would just provide better safety and efficiency and mobility for everyone. So we're urging the applicant and staff to work together to see if that might be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up to speak, we have Tila. Tila, we'll go ahead and open your mic here. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I didn't know Kurt was here. That's really good to hear. I really appreciate his comments, and a lot of them I second. Particularly, I'm excited about the dedication to reducing the parking amenities, the dedicated single-use parking of vehicles that will stay there on site all the time. Certainly support an increased allocation of bike parking, but would also like to just encourage in general a lean toward flexibility for other micromobility modes or other shared vehicle modes. So trying to get credit for parking vehicles that are now car share vehicles or electric vehicles that are shared. We are actively exploring as a city different micromobility options, and it's a little frustrating that our planning documents and our planning procedures are only thinking about SOVs and bikes and possibly e-bikes, but not much more beyond that. So in a similar way that I would support the flexibility and holding open some space for mixed use in the future, assuming that you know, some zoning changes happen that would allow a coffee shop on site where it's not allowed now. Supporting flexibility to hold space to stash and store and accommodate vehicles that are not strictly a single owner vehicle or single owner motor vehicle, single owner bicycle. I echo Kurt's and Community Cycle's concern about lack of permeability to the north. It looks kind of complicated to enter the site from the north as it's envisioned right now, and particularly because this parcel is located between some really attractive public amenities in terms of parking, in terms of grocery stores and services to the southeast, and then campus to the northwest. We're really hoping for a lot more access either direction by people who are living there to be able to get there by foot or by not a vehicle. And it looks like most of the access to the site is envisioned as coming from the south, from baseline. And I would like to see a little bit more permeability for people arriving by non-motor vehicle modes to the north, because that's probably, if we're going to get them to walk and bike or use some of these other micro transit options that are emerging to access the main campus in the north, we need to be able to make sure that the buildings accommodate that. I think my last point is that the open space is looking really terrific in terms of square footage, but it's quite broken up. I hear Carol Adams saying, you know, it's about as big as a city park, and that's really great. But when it's chopped up into smaller bits, it does not function as a city park. So I would just caution you about crediting that too much, because when you have things like dedicated courts for a particular sport, you're already carving out a very minimal and inflexible use of that open space. But by and large, I think this is a very exciting development. I really support, in general, what I'm seeing here, and I really look forward to seeing it progress in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. We're at time here. And we'll go ahead and see if there are any other speakers who wish to speak at this time. Please go ahead and use the raise your hand feature. And I'm not seeing any other members of the public who wish to speak at this time.
Okay, Ryan, are there any people on the phone who might want to speak?
There are no phone numbers calling in. So everyone,
okay, great.
User.
Okay, and it looks like we're going once, going twice on public comment. All right, then back to the applicant. If you heard anything in those comments, you have 3 minutes that you can use to respond.
Thank you. Am I muted or?
No, we can hear you, Adrian.
I think the main thing is that we want to work with the city in whatever way makes sense. And in terms of the north side connection, please bear in mind that there already is a north side connection that happens on the south side of the U Club property, which does have a public access easement. Our concern is duplicating that is not relatively, in our opinion, reasonable to do. So we're not trying to do away with that. We just need to see how we can connect to it, or that can reasonably be lengthened to the 29th Street right of way. In terms of access for vehicles, yes, the primary access is from the south. There is, of course, the link for pedestrians. We are going to have a link for pedestrians at the northwest corner of the building through a staircase, but there's still a controlled entry point, because this is a place where there's a shared amenity at the southwest corner of the site. Plus, that's where people get their mail. That's where they have a sort of social gathering nexus and then enter into the courtyards. So we're not trying to create multiple entry points into the courtyards, but focus the social gathering places towards the southwest and then disperse into the courtyards. I'm sure there's opportunities for doing larger gathering areas in the central zone between the two buildings once we can get rid of that hammerhead. And I don't doubt it's appropriate to open up a more sort of general outdoor play area. And I'm sure Carol can talk more about that if she wants to. I think that's it for me.
Okay. All righty, thanks. Then let's bring it back to the board for deliberation. Can you just start by pulling up the first major issue for discussion as a guide? And I don't want to curtail anybody's desire to just talk generally about the project. So you're welcome to address the first question that was posed to us by staff as a key issue, which has to do with, if the proposed mix of uses, primarily student apartments, that is consistent with the intent of the business transition 1 to BT1 zone site, including the ground floor residential. So feel free to jump on that issue or give a general comment. I see Peter's got a finger up. Is that just a finger or a whole hand? Whole hand, 2 hands. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
I believe strongly that there's no need to force retail where it's not going to succeed. And so I have no issue on this piece. I do think you have a captive audience of students and other residents looking to procure goods. However, I know there's a lot of development in the area, and there's a shopping center that isn't living up to its full potential on either side, actually, east and west of 36. So I just want to get in there that I don't believe we need to force retail where it's not. So I'm okay with this piece of the ground floor residential if I'm reading this right.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. And, I also think, I agree with Peter. I also think staff is generally signaling that as well in their recommendation. I would say that when you come down that east side of the 28th Street frontage road, it kind of puts you in a hole around that bend, and you may be alleviating some of that by pulling the sidewalk, creating the sidewalk, and then pulling the building back and having that patio with the tables and stuff. But I would also suggest that maybe more of a wraparound retail kind of presence, so that you don't just see the coffee shop from the baseline side, but you see it from the 28th Street frontage road side when you're north of the project site, and it draws people down towards baseline and brightens up that corner and kind of alleviates that sort of hole that it's in. Could be a really beneficial additional retail piece. And I don't even know if that means making the retail piece bigger. It just might mean a little reorientation to make it wrap around. But in general, I think that the mix of uses is fine for the area, and I think that first key issue has been met. Other comments, John?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the mix is fine. I'd like to see, I think your suggestions about bringing the coffee shop and having a little bit more commercial along 28th Street makes sense to me on the ground floor.
Any other thoughts, David, Lisa? David?
Sorry about that. My mouse clicked on the wrong real estate on my screen. Yeah, I'll just also say that I would be supportive of this use review. When we went back, and I was there in the room when we were presented with the the request to have ground floor street facing commercial. And one thing I did was I went to every, BC1, BC2 zone and all the affected zones. And it really made sense to me that we came up with this limited use category, because it's important to realize that it just isn't a cookie cutter thing. So it's a nice thing to encourage, but in this case, clearly, if you go down the frontage road, there isn't any retail or commercial space till you're well past Aurora. In fact, almost to Arapahoe. So to try to shoehorn, that in would be. But I do want to just build on one other thing that you mentioned, the wraparound, Harmon. I think that's a great idea. I do think that this is going to be really visible from 36, as you've mentioned, and will be kind of a gateway. So the wraparound would help with that. And I also just want to say that as you finalize the design, just the activity level on that corner, it's a great place for activity. It's not going to bother anybody because it's like, you know, just kind of out there, but it'll be really nice for people to see folks out on the deck by the swimming pool and all that kind of stuff as you drive into Boulder. It's just kind of a nice activity addition. So I just wanted to add that. And I do think that this furthers our need for student housing in an appropriate place and our BVCP policies around housing.
Any other comments around the first key issue?
I'll just
Lisa?
briefly say that I've been a little quiet because I agree so much with what I'm hearing from everyone else. So I won't belabor your points, but I agree with the rest of planning board.
Thanks for that. Do we want to move on to the second key issue? Okay. That is, does the site plan and the proposed open space elements respond to both primary users of student rentals and office on the site? Take hands. John?
Well, I think in general it does. As I've expressed before, I'm really very interested in permeability for the public through the site, and I note that the applicant has not committed very much on that front, and that makes me nervous. The other concern that I have, and I'm trying to get a feel for whether it is a real issue or not, and that is the use of the open space that's required by code by both the office and the student population in that area. And in general, I think it's good. They should be mixed. We don't want to segregate students from everybody else to the degree that they can interact happily. But I'm just wondering, when that office building was built, wasn't there a distinct open space requirement associated with it that was intended primarily for the office use? And this is perhaps something that staff can answer. I'm just want to be sure that we're not engaging in some sort of double counting here with respect to how open space is required for both office and the new uses, and it's unclear to me to what degree that you can use the open space officially for both purposes from the code requirement.
Well, I'm happy to have Elaine jump in here. You know, I think you had a slide, Elaine, which said 20% of the site for open space for the commercial and 1,200 square feet per unit of residential, and that they were counted cumulatively. But I'll let you explain if I got that wrong.
Well, it's so for the overall site, it can be shared, and there are site review criteria for sharing open space in a mixed use setting. And what those criteria say is that you just need to meet the needs of the users. The 20% or roughly 30,000 square feet of open space that's required for the office building could probably be met just around the building itself. And then the remainder amount that's 1,200 square feet per dwelling unit is met throughout the site. So it can be shared, but it's probably just meeting its own need around the office space. And particularly, as Carol pointed out, with the hammerhead going away, a greater amount of open space amenity could be provided. That hammerhead could count if it had special paving. It's a nuance of how you define usable open space. But once that becomes retrofitted with some active or passive amenities, then it can meet the letter of the code and the site review criteria and the criteria for open space in a mixed use setting. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think so. Related to that, Harmon, can I pursue this? a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Related to that is a question, have open space requirements diminished for offices since that office building was built, such that open space that was required for that when it was built is now being allocated to the student residential use?
No, I think, we'd have to go back and look at the zoning code in 1970, but odds are it was 10 to 20% at that time as well. I don't know if Charles has any input on that, but given the fact that today surrounding the office building, there's a lot of parking and likely there's 30,000 square feet of open space, but given the fact that that parking is going to go away and being replaced by open space, it probably would exceed that requirement. I think Carol put up a number, 75,000 square feet that actually is being in that area surrounding the office building where 30,000 is required. And
under existing, okay, go ahead, sorry.
Yep. I was going to say, while you're talking, we could also see if we can dig up some of the records from the 70s, but likely it was 10 to 20% back in the day as well.
Okay, well, I'd be interested in whatever you find in the historical situation there.
Looks like Adrian Sofer also had a comment, and if the chair would like to open it up, Adrian had a point about open space and 20%.
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
It might be useful to remember that the open space at 20% is based on the size of the site. And the office building site was significantly smaller before it became combined with the Best Western site. So we're taking 20% across the entire site now, whereas when it was just an office building, that site was about 25% the size it is today in this application.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you.
So, John, can I take over now, or are you?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So, in the interest of honoring Tila's request, we've broken our discussion down into the two key issues that are listed in the staff memo. But when we do a concept plan review, we are also expected to consult with the concept plan review criteria, which are in 9213E of the code. And there are about 8 of them, I think, last I checked, but I might have forgotten. So I've got some of them, and I've got them in front of me, so we can talk to the characteristics of the site and surrounding areas. We can consider community policy considerations, like what review processes it's going to have to go through, and ordinances, goals, and policies. And in that respect, we look at the comprehensive plan compliance of the application. We look at the criteria and the review procedures and so forth for site review, because the project's going to have to come back for site review, which is the actual approval. Permits that have to be obtained or that might be required to be completed after site review approval, transportation opportunities and constraints, environmental opportunities, and we already talked a little bit about detention on the site, appropriate range of land uses, and the appropriateness or necessity of housing. So those are 8 different things. So I'm gonna, as part of addressing the second key issue, I'm just gonna give a few of my general comments, which include the wraparound coffee shop to create more of a presence, going up the 28th Street frontage road. I'm glad that the Wagner building is being preserved. I think as we think about what kind of materials the apartment building is faced with, we ought to think about materials that complement the Wagner building. I think wide sidewalks in this area are a must. There is the potential for a lot of north-south traffic pedestrian traffic, and it's not always the most attractive place at night, so you don't want to squeeze pedestrians too tightly on a narrow sidewalk. Plus, you know, I think you've got the room with the setback, and it really will help provide gathering places and flexibility for events and stuff like that. Like David said, there's really not, there aren't a lot of neighbors to really tick off. And this is a great area with its swimming pool and the coffee shop. That corner could really be lively, and I think a wide sidewalk would help that. Separated bike lane is a worthy concept to check out. The east-west connection might be shareable with the University Club. I don't know, you know, if there's already a link on the transportation plan and a public access easement, and all you've got to do is get to your property line, and then you can potentially take advantage of that. You know, I don't know what the city attorney is going to think of that, but I would recommend you definitely take a good look at that. I also think that added bike parking, maybe even sheltered by solar, with the additional space that's now opened up without the hammerhead, might be a possibility. And then in that northeast quadrant of the property between the apartment building and the Wagoner office building where the hammerhead was going to go, I think it's a great opportunity to put in some really nice garden features. And, you know, I definitely heard the applicant already speak to that a little bit, but, you know, there's sort of a sea of parking around there, urban heat island kind of stuff, and just a lot of cars. And it would be nice to see something decorative and beautiful and green. And I also think that, you know, it sends a message to the residents that the building that they're renting an apartment in is something special and something to be cherished. So those are my comments around that, and I'll turn it over to whoever's next. David?
So you covered quite a few things that I also had on my list and agree with. I will reinforce what we've heard from a number of people, that I think that the community cycles input that Alexi Davies sent out, and that we've heard from people who have come to the meeting today. Kurt, thank you. I think that there's some good ideas there. I don't know if it has to be a when I came up out of the that underpass area, I noticed those certainly those crossings. So getting rid of those openings onto the frontage road are a huge improvement, I think. So that's great. But I do feel that you know, you go down the frontage road, and then it takes a couple more blocks before you actually get to those dedicated bike lanes along the road. So if there's an opportunity to make improvements, to give more dedicated bike space on that multi-use path, that would be great. So we'll see where that comes for site review. With the permeability, I kind of actually, you know, right now, if you go to that site, there's fences along the north, and there's fences between the current property and the office, or between the current and the office building next door. So it's really kind of fenced off right now. So opening it up is going to be huge for permeability already off the block. And I don't really think that, you know, and I don't know what my other board members are feeling. I don't think we're thinking that it has to be opened up as like a throughway for bike traffic or anything, but just having it open to the public and easy to walk in and out of, and welcoming, and that it's you know, I think will be good. And I'm always interested, like Harmon said, in whether you can make an arrangement with another private property owner to the north for that connection. I realize that it's hard for us to ask for things that require you to make private arrangements, but I think a good connection to the north would be really useful. Electric vehicle charging stations, I think, are required for parking lots of this size. And I think students are going to start wanting to get electric vehicles. Young people are going to be excited about that. So I would encourage, you know, put in as many EV stations. If you think it's going to require more than a required, that'd be great to see a site review. Bicycle parking, absolutely. We're going to want to see how many long-term and how many outside short-term spaces are provided, and make sure that those really anticipate a pretty high demand because the students are not necessarily going to want to be owning cars, and but they'll definitely almost every one of them will have at least one bike. Great. And like John said, some principles are very important. So of course, the residents are going to want to have to, you're going to want to have to charge for a space. It's not like it should be bundled in with or it should be just expected that you would be able to park down there. So some principles for parking will be useful when we get to a site review. And I'll leave it at there. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, Dave. I see Lisa's got her hand going up.
So yeah, some of these will repeat other folks. I'll move quick. I just wanted to go off of something Peter said earlier, and that is, for anything that we see come forward, I'm always excited to see that we're meeting the requirements for code in terms of sustainability and climate change. And I encourage you, where feasible, I know that it can add to cost, to try to exceed those and make it a marketing piece as well. So to the extent possible, I always love to see that, and I'll be looking for it when it comes back. I also appreciate the adaptive reuse of the Wagner building. Love the thought of having some kind of a coffee shop. I think if it's sized correctly, it could basically have enough clientele just from the people there, while also having other people come in. And I love the thought of that. I second or third the dedicated protected bike lane where possible for that main street. I think in the interior area is more of a smooth, accessible Mooner kind of style is better, but when people are trying to move at speed through and pedestrians are on a wide sidewalk, it's nice if you can dedicate some room to the bikes. Also love the thought of covered, protected, maybe caged bike storage, which I think Harmon brought up. So, I think that's very attractive to residents as well, and to office workers. So I'd love to see that. And it's nice when your bike's not wet when you come back out to it. And then I just wanted to say I really appreciate the team's approach and attention to landscape design. And I look forward to seeing, how that moves forward and what we see in terms of changes, especially with losing the hammerhead. And then you may have actually mentioned this, and I apologize if you did, but where possible and appropriate to soil types, I also love to see permeable pavers, kind of using green spaces to break up large kind of hardscaped areas and so on, I think is always really nice. So maybe that's something we'll see if it makes sense for the site. Thank you.
All right, thanks for those comments. Peter.
All right, well, I like the project, and I'll reiterate just in closing, because everything was covered very well, particularly permeability of the site from pedestrian point of view and the bikeways. Renew the call for art and then tie that to something that I think is very meaningful and shouldn't be overlooked. And it's called out in Elaine's comment 13 on the design land use review results. This is at an entry point to Boulder, and your own presentation calls out simple and elegant as a trademark of the property. So I understand the need to brand this because there are hub developments across the country, but please consider the continuing what seems to be in page A7, the tasteful use of the logo, and refrain from trying to plaster the company name at the front door to our town. People will know the name of the development. We don't need to be reminded, and as giant letters as possible. And continue with what seems to be represented as tasteful signage. I don't know how much can be seen from the road, but it is a meaningful entry to our town, and it's a honor. You have an honored spot there, so thank you for respecting that.
Thanks for that. Any other comments? Okay. And I think we're going to wrap it up. Never been my it's never been my preference to have the chair go back over and try to summarize what everybody said. So I will continue not to do that, and just to open it up to the applicant. If you have anything you want us to repeat, you can ask us to do that. Or if you have any final thoughts about the things that we said, this is your opportunity to talk back to us a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I'll just add that I did not cover in the presentation and probably should have, which is that the entry into the site, into the student housing is actually an outdoor entry intentionally so that bikes could be brought into the courtyard, and there will be protected bike storage inside of the gate in the courtyard zone. And we're working out the form of that. We have it right now shown as a sort of a corral-like area, but we're also looking at possibility of spreading it out in outdoor walkway zones. So we'll be providing a fair amount of that. Plus there'll be the opportunity in the garage as well. So we're very conscious of this being a bike-friendly facility. And we recognize that by and large, that's what people will be doing all the time if they live here. And in terms of the connections, we'll certainly look at that with staff and continue to work on it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for your presentation, and good luck with the site review and the rest of your work.
Thank you.
Okay, going to close up this public hearing right now. And well, I know we usually do take a break at 8 o'clock. We're basically done. There's an informational item around driving bicycles on the sidewalk, and in a nutshell, there's some dismount zones that are based on zoning districts, and that's not really intuitive to somebody on a bicycle. They don't know whether they're in an RL1 or an RL2 or whatever. So there's some changes to how bike riding on sidewalks is going to be permitted and not permitted. The gentleman who's responsible for this information item has left all of his contact information in the staff report, and there will be no presentation on this tonight. So if any planning board member has any questions around that, feel free to just email staff. So we're going to move on from matter number 5, that informational item, which is just in the packet, and jump to debrief of the meeting and calendar check. Is there any debriefing matter or calendar check matter that anybody wants to bring up? Cindy.
I wanted to let you know that, as you know, I sent out a poll to you about a training that was going to come up for February 25th and March 25th as well. It's a 2-part training for bias and microaggression. It's a joint training, meaning it's for several boards. It's Planning Board, HAC, and HRC. That is happening. And while you were holding your meeting, I sent out the appointments to you. And the link will be provided in the next week or so. But you do have the appointments on your calendar now. It will be from 5 to 9 on those evenings. And you will really enjoy it. It's a really great training.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else calendar-wise? No? Hey, Jacob.
Hello. Just one additional item for you, if I may jump in terms of briefing. This really should probably fall under item number 5 in terms of briefing from planning director. If you all had just a moment.
Yeah.
Looking over notes here. So first of all, thank you, and thank you for your service here at the relatively early hour of 8:30 p.m. I appreciate that. I just wanted to take a moment here to brief you all in terms of director communications and bring you up to speed with discussion about council midterm retreat and work items, if that's appropriate. And Mr. Chair, if you would hear a brief from that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I kind of blasted through matters because I wasn't looking carefully enough, and I know that I wanted Charles actually to give us a little debrief on on the final disposition on the Macy's site as part of matters from the planning director too. So why don't you go ahead and take a crack at your piece, and then we'll give Charles his time too.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Harmon. I'll go ahead and do that, and then if Charles wants to jump in after me, we can fill out the evening. So just very briefly, as you may be aware, Council recently held its midterm retreat, and this is a very productive kind of work session by Council, where they took up discussion of new work items for city departments' work plans in 2010. And as a part of that, Council requested that staff of Planning and Development Services explore the feasibility of coordination of concept plan review among multiple boards. And this request originated with Council letters from the Transportation Advisory Board and the Design Advisory Board, who requested additional involvement earlier in the development review process. And initially, this was a broader generalized request. And at Mayor Weaver's suggestion, the Council decided that it should be focused on the concept plan review process. So after discussion, Council tasked the staff with exploring the feasibility of this request. And that involves scoping the tasks involved with coordinating multiple board reviews among boards with differing powers and differing constituting ordinances, some of them being advisory in nature and others having quasi-judicial functions, such as you all have. The staff have begun this process to analyze the necessary changes to enable the TAB and the DAB feedback, which might include things like code modifications, changes to our practices and processes, and potentially even new resources, including staff time or additional positions, depending on the scope of the work needed. We've also begun to look at the impacts to the applicant experience, which can include additional feedback processes, additional time and complexity in the process, and the potential resolution of differing feedback from those boards. And with all that said, we are seeking the feedback of Planning Board and presenting this to you tonight for consideration. I'm happy to answer any initial questions that you may have. However, we aren't looking for your feedback at this time. What we're going to do is schedule a time for that in a future meeting. This is just a report out from Council's midterm retreat. So with that, I'll end that brief and happy to take any questions if you have them.
Does anybody want to ask Jacob any questions? I don't have any questions, but Jacob, I just want to appreciate you for all the times that I've looked at the attendees and seen that you're our new planning director and you're sitting through our planning board meetings. So thank you very much for the attention that you're paying to our work.
Well, thank you, Harmon. And I only regret that we can't be doing it in person, but I'm sure we'll be there again soon. So, so thank you, and glad to be here.
Awesome. Charles, I know I wanted to, since I reported back some information about, I guess it was January 5th when I went in front of City Council to tell them about our vote, and they deliberated on Macy's. Since then, I think there's been a decision and it's been finalized. Could you bring us up to speed on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And Harmon, I wanted to thank you again for attending and testifying at Council. It was definitely a late night and a very involved discussion. So thanks for hanging in there. I think it was really helpful in setting the context with Council. So on the 5th, Council had their public hearing on Macy's and voted to approve the application after a lengthy discussion on 2 conditions: that we bring back a covenant for voluntary payment of $3 million for the city's affordable housing fund, which is generally equivalent to the linkage fee under the Boulder revised code. And then the second condition was a covenant requiring the proposed 7,500 square feet of retail space to be permanently affordable, rented at a maximum of 80% of the average rent paid for comparable rent in the city. So that advanced to Council on the 19th of January, and they approved both of those covenants and adopted them. So the Macy's site review application was formally approved with those 2 conditions.
Was there anything else that that you wanted to bring up during matters, Charles?
Nothing from staff.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any planning board members, now that we've backed up to, to matters, any planning board members with any matters before we go back to the end of the meeting? Peter?
Applications for boards and commissions was extended till today.
Till 5 o'clock today.
5 o'clock
So
today.
yeah, you'll notice I didn't give my speech about a plea for more applications because by the time we had started our meeting, the deadline had passed by an hour. So hopefully there were a good number of members of the public who applied for planning board. As of a few days ago, there were only 4. So hopefully we got a few last minute applications in. Cindy, do you know anything about that?
I do not. I have that
Okay.
as 4 as well.
Okay, all right, David?
We usually get, I think, a PDF with all of the applications for all the boards at some point. Do you know approximately how long that takes generally, or when we'll see that?
I would give it a few weeks. I'm not exactly sure how long that will be, but I would say at least a few weeks. They have to go through everything and vet them. And I don't think that comes out until they actually decide who's going to be called to.
I would say it'd be the last week in February.
Thank you.
Likely.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for that.
Okay. And then the council meeting for approval of the new planning board member will be March 16th. So I think that's it for us. Anything else at all in matters? Okay. And we debriefed or we chose not to, and we've completed our calendar check. So I think with nothing further, I'm just going to adjourn the meeting. Thanks for everybody's attendance and participation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Goodbye.
You too.